The paperback edition of The God Delusion is soon to come out in Britain in the middle of May, and in America it will come out in September or October. I've written a longish new preface to the paperback, which consists mostly of responses to criticisms of the hardback. So what I thought I would do today is to give a little performance of reading the preface to the paperback, which nobody here has seen, and then that'll take about the first half, and then the second half we'll have a discussion, and I think we've got a roving mic, which, is that right? We've got a roving mic? Which, no? Okay. So we don't have a roving mic, so people will have to just shout when it comes to asking questions or indeed making comments. I have brought here a Spanish edition of The God Delusion, which what I wanted to do was to bring a lot of copies of this, one for each of our wonderful naturalist guides. But unfortunately, books are extremely heavy and bulky, and I couldn't get them into my suitcase. So what I will do is present this to the ship's library in the hope that the naturalist guides and anybody else may like to read it there. The British paperback, if anybody wants to see it, is here, and it's the preface to that I'm now going to read and then invite questions. The God Delusion in the hardback edition was widely described as the surprise bestseller of 2006. It was warmly received by the great majority of those who sent in their personal reviews to Amazon, more than 1,000 at the time of writing. Approval was less overwhelming in the printed reviews, however. A cynic might put this down to an unimaginative reflex of reviews editors. It has God in the title, so send it to a known faith head. That would be too cynical, however. Several unfavorable reviews began with the phrase, which I long ago learned to treat as ominous, "I'm an atheist, but." As Dan Dennett noted in Breaking the Spell, a bafflingly large number of intellectuals believe in belief, even though they lack religious belief themselves. These vicarious second-order believers are often more zealous than the real thing, their zeal pumped up by ingratiating broad-mindedness. Alas, I can't share your faith, but I respect and sympathize with it. I'm an atheist, but the sequel is nearly always unhelpful, nihilistic, or worse, suffused with a sort of exultant negativity. Notice, by the way, the distinction from another favorite genre. I used to be an atheist, but. That is one of the oldest tricks in the book, much favored by religious apologists from C.S. Lewis to the present day. It serves to establish some sort of street cred up front, and it is amazing how often it works. Look out for it. I wrote an article for the website richarddawkins.net called I'm an Atheist But, and I've borrowed from it in the following list of critical or otherwise negative points from reviews of the hardback. That website, conducted by the inspired Josh Timonen, has attracted an enormous number of contributors who have effectively eviscerated all these criticisms, but in less guarded, more outspoken tones than my own, or than those of my academic colleagues A.C. Grayling, Daniel Dennett, Paul Kurtz, Stephen Weinberg, and others who have done so in print and reproduced on the same website. You can't criticize religion without a detailed analysis of learned books of theology. Surprise bestseller? If I'd gone to town, as one self-consciously intellectual critic wished, on the epistemological differences between Aquinas and Duns Scotus, if I'd done justice to Eriugena on subjectivity, Rana on grace, or Moltmann on hope, as he vainly hoped I would, my book would have been more than a surprise bestseller. It would have been a miraculous one. But that is not the point. Unlike Stephen Hawking, who accepted advice that every formula he published would halve his sales, I would happily have foregone bestsellerdom if there had been the slightest hope of Duns Scotus illuminating my central question of whether God exists. the vast majority of theological writings simply assume that he does and go on from there. For my purposes, I need consider only those theologians who take seriously the possibility that God does not exist and argue that he does. This, I think, Chapter 3 does, with what I hope is good humour and sufficient comprehensiveness. When it comes to good humour, I cannot improve on the splendid Courtier's Reply published by P.Z. Myers, that's P.Z. Myers to you, on his Pharyngula website. I have considered the impudent accusations of Mr. Dawkins with exasperation at his lack of serious scholarship. He has apparently not read the detailed discourses of Count Roderigo of Seville on the exquisite and exotic leathers of the emperor's boots. Nor does he give a moment's consideration to Bellini's masterwork on the luminescence of the emperor's feathered hat. We have entire schools dedicated to writing learned treatises on the beauty of the emperor's raiment, and every major newspaper runs a section dedicated to imperial fashion. Dawkins arrogantly ignores all these deep philosophical ponderings to crudely accuse the emperor of nudity. Until Dawkins has trained in the shops of Paris and Milan, until he has learned to tell the difference between a ruffled flounce and a puffy pantaloon, we should all pretend he has not spoken out against the emperor's taste. His training in biology may give him the ability to recognize dangling genitalia when he sees it, but it has not taught him the proper appreciation of imaginary fabrics. To expand the point, most of us happily disavow fairies, astrology, and the flying spaghetti monster without first immersing ourselves in books of Pastafarian theology, etc. The next criticism is a related one, the great straw man offensive. You always attack the worst of religion and ignore the best. You go after crude, rabble-rousing chancers like Ted Haggard, Jerry Falwell, and Pat Robertson, rather than sophisticated theologians like Tillich or Bonhoeffer, who teach the sort of religion I believe in. If only such subtle, nuanced religion predominated, the world would surely be a better place, and I would have written a different book. The melancholy truth is that this kind of understated, decent religion is numerically negligible. To the vast majority of believers around the world, religion all too closely resembles what you hear from the likes of Robertson, Falwell or Haggard, Osama bin Laden or the Ayatollah Khomeini. These are not straw men. They are all too influential, and everybody in the modern world has to deal with them. I'm an atheist, but I wish to dissociate myself from your shrill, strident, intemperate, intolerant, ranting language. Actually, if you look at the language of the God delusion, it is rather less shrill or intemperate than we regularly take in our stride when listening to political commentators, for example, or theatre, art, or book critics. Here are some samples of recent restaurant criticism from leading London newspapers. It is difficult, if not impossible, to imagine anyone conjuring up a restaurant, even in their sleep, where the food in its mediocrity comes so close to inedible. All things considered, quite the worst restaurant in London, maybe the world, serves horrendous food grudgingly in a room that is a museum to Italian waiters' taste, Kirko 1976. The worst meal I've ever eaten. Not by a small margin. I mean the worst, the most unrelievedly awful. What looked like a sea mine in miniature was the most disgusting thing I've put in my mouth since I ate earthworms at school. The strongest language to be found in the God delusion is tame and measured by comparison. If it sounds intemperate, it is only because of the weird convention, almost universally accepted, see the quotation from Douglas Adams in the book, that religious faith is uniquely privileged, above and beyond criticism. Insulting a restaurant might seem trivial compared to insulting God, but restaurateurs and chefs really exist, and they have feelings to be hurt. Whereas blasphemy, as the witty bumper sticker puts it, is a victimless crime. In 1915, the British Member of Parliament, Horatio Bottomley, recommended that after the war, if by chance you should discover one day in a restaurant you are being served by a German waiter, you will throw the soup in his foul face. If you find yourself sitting at the side of a German clerk, you will spill the ink pot over his foul head. Now that's strident and intolerant, and I should have thought ridiculous and ineffective as rhetoric, even in its own time. Contrast it with the opening sentence of chapter 2, which is the passage most often quoted as strident or shrill. It's not for me to say whether I succeeded, but my intention was closer to robust but humorous broadside than shrill polemic. In public readings of the God Delusion, this is the one passage that is guaranteed to get a good-natured laugh, which is why my wife and I invariably use it as the warm-up act to break the ice with a new audience. If I could venture to suggest why the humour works, I think it is the incongruous mismatch between a subject that could have been stridently or vulgarly expressed and the actual expression in a drawn-out list of Latinate or pseudo-scholarly words: filicidal, megalomaniacal, pestilential. My model here was one of the funniest writers of the 20th century, and nobody could call Evelyn Waugh shrill or strident. I even gave the game away by mentioning his name in the anecdote that immediately follows. Book critics or theatre critics can be derisively negative and gain delighted praise for the trenchant wit of their review. But in criticisms of religion, even clarity ceases to be a virtue and sounds like aggressive hostility. A politician may attack an opponent scathingly across the floor of the House and earn plaudits for his robust pugnacity. But let a soberly reasoning critic of religion employ what would in other contexts sound merely direct or forthright, and it will be described as a rant. Polite society will purse its lips and shake its head, even secular polite society, and especially that part of secular society that loves to announce, "I'm an atheist, but..." You are only preaching to the choir. What's the point? Convert's Corner on richarddawkins.net gives the lie to this premise, but even taking it at face value, there are good answers. One is that the non-believing choir is a lot bigger than many people think, especially in America. But again, especially in America, it is largely a closet choir, and it desperately needs encouragement to come out. Judging by the thanks I received all over North America on my book tour, the encouragement that people like Sam Harris, Dan Dennett, Christopher Hitchens and me are able to give is greatly appreciated. A more subtle reason for preaching to the choir is the need to raise consciousness. When the feminists raised our consciousness about sexist pronouns, they would have been preaching to the choir where the more substantive issues of the rights of women and the evils of discrimination against them were concerned. But that decent liberal choir still needed its consciousness raised with respect to everyday language. However right on we may have been on the political issues of rights and discrimination, we nevertheless still unconsciously bought into linguistic conventions that made half the human race feel excluded. There are other linguistic conventions that need to go the same way as sexist pronouns, and the atheist choir is not exempt. We all need our consciousness raised. Atheists as well as theists unconsciously observe society's convention that we must be especially polite and respectful to faith. And I never tire of drawing attention to society's tacit acceptance of the labeling of small children with the religious opinions of their parents. Atheists need to raise their own consciousness of the anomaly. Religious opinion is the one kind of parental opinion that, by almost universal consent, can be fastened upon children who are, in truth, too young to know what their opinion really is. There is no such thing as a Christian child. Only a child of Christian parents sees every opportunity to ram it home. You are just as much of a fundamentalist as those you criticize. No, please, it is all too easy to mistake passion that can change its mind for fundamentalism, which never will. Fundamentalist Christians are passionately opposed to evolution, and I'm passionately in favor of it. Passion for passion, we are evenly matched, and that, according to some, means we are equally fundamentalist. But, to borrow an aphorism whose source I'm unable to pin down, when two opposite points of view are expressed with equal force, the truth does not necessarily lie midway between them. It is possible for one side to be simply wrong, and that justifies passion on the other side. Fundamentalists know what they believe, and they know that nothing will change their minds. The quotation from Kurt Wise in the book says it all. If all the evidence in the universe turns against creationism, I would be the first to admit it, but I would still be a creationist because that is what the Word of God seems to indicate. Here I must stand. It is impossible to overstress the difference between such a passionate commitment to biblical fundamentals and the true scientist's equally passionate commitment to evidence. The fundamentalist Kurt Wise proclaims that all the evidence in the universe would not change his mind. The true scientist, however passionately he may believe in evolution, knows exactly what it would take to change his mind: evidence. As J.B.S. Haldane said when asked what evidence might contradict evolution, fossil rabbits in the Precambrian. Let me coin my own opposite version of Kurt Wise's manifesto. If all the evidence in the universe turns in favor of creationism, I would be the first to admit it, and I would immediately change my mind. As things stand, however, all available evidence, and there is a vast amount of it, favors evolution. It is for this reason and this reason alone that I argue for evolution with a passion that matches the passion of those who argue against it. My passion is based on evidence. Theirs, flying in the face of evidence as it does, is truly fundamentalist. I'm an atheist myself, but religion is here to stay. Live with it. You want to get rid of religion? Good luck to you. You think you can get rid of religion? What planet are you living on? Religion is a fixture. Get over it. I could bear any of these downers if they were uttered in something approaching a tone of regret or concern. On the contrary, the tone of voice is sometimes downright gleeful. I don't think it's masochism. More probably we can put it down to belief in belief again. These people may not be religious themselves, but they love the idea that other people are religious. This brings me to my final category of naysayers. I'm an atheist myself, but people need religion. What are you going to put in its place? How are you going to comfort the bereaved? How are you going to fill the need? What patronizing condescension. You and I, of course, are much too intelligent and well-educated to need religion. But ordinary people, hoi polloi, the Orwellian proles, the Huxleyan deltas and epsilon semi-morons, need religion. I'm reminded of an occasion when I was lecturing at a conference on the public understanding of science, and I briefly inveighed against dumbing down. In the question and answer session at the end, one member of the audience stood up and suggested that dumbing down might be necessary to bring minorities and women to science. His tone of voice told that he genuinely thought he was being liberal and progressive. I can just imagine what the women and minorities in the audience thought about it. Returning to humanity's need for comfort, it is of course real, but isn't there something childish in the belief that the universe owes us comfort as of right? Isaac Asimov's remark about the infantilism of pseudoscience is just as applicable to religion. Inspect every piece of pseudoscience and you will find a security blanket, a thumb to suck, a skirt to hold. It is astonishing, moreover, how many people are unable to understand that X is comforting does not imply X is true. A related plaint concerns the need for a purpose in life. To quote one Canadian critic, "The atheist may be right about God, who knows? But God or no God, it's clear that something in the human soul requires a belief that life has a purpose that transcends the material plane. One would think that a more rational than thou empiricist such as Dawkins would recognize this unchanging aspect of human nature." Does Dawkins really think this world would be a more humane place if we all look to the God delusion instead of the Bible for truth and comfort? Actually, yes. Since you mention humane, yes, I do. But I must repeat yet again that the consolation content of a belief does not raise its truth value. Of course, I cannot deny the need for emotional comfort, and I cannot claim that the worldview adopted in this book offers any more than moderate comfort to, for example, the bereaved. But if the comfort that religion seems to offer is founded on the neurologically highly implausible premise that we survive the death of our brains, do you really want to defend it? In any case, I don't think I've ever met anyone at a funeral who dissents from the view that the non-religious part, eulogies, the deceased's favourite poems or music, are more moving than the prayers. Having read The God Delusion, Dr. David Ashton, a British consultant physician, wrote to me on the unexpected death on Christmas Day 2006 of his beloved 17-year-old son, Luke. Shortly before Luke's death, the two of them had talked appreciatively of the charitable foundation that I'm setting up to encourage reason and science. At Luke's funeral on the Isle of Man, his father suggested to the congregation that if they wished to make any kind of contribution in Luke's memory, they should send it to my foundation, as Luke would have wished. The 30 cheques received amounted to more than £2,000, including more than £600 from a whip round in the local village pub. This boy was obviously much loved. When I read the order of service for the funeral ceremony, I literally wept, although I had never met Luke, and I asked for permission to reproduce it at richarddawkins.net. A lone piper played the Manx Lament, Elin Valin. Two friends spoke eulogies. Dr. Ashton himself recited Dylan Thomas's beautiful poem, Fern Hill. Now as I was young and easy under the apple boughs, so achingly evocative of lost youth. And then I catch my breath to report he read the opening lines of my own Unweaving the Rainbow, lines that I have long earmarked for my own funeral. We are going to die, and that makes us the lucky ones. Most people are never going to die because they are never going to be born. The potential people who could have been here in my place but who will in fact never see the light of day outnumber the sand grains of Sahara. Certainly those unborn ghosts include greater poets than Keats, scientists greater than Newton. We know this because the set of possible people allowed by our DNA so massively outnumbers the set of actual people. In the teeth of these stupefying odds, it is you and I, in our ordinariness, that are here. We privileged few who won the lottery of birth against all odds, how dare we whine at our inevitable return to that prior state from which the vast majority have never stirred? Obviously, there are exceptions, but I suspect that for many people, the main reason they cling to religion is not that it is consoling, but that they've been let down by our educational system and don't realize that non-belief is even an option. This is certainly true of most people who think they are creationists. They've simply not been properly taught Darwin's astounding alternative. Probably the same is true of the belittling myth that people need religion. At a recent conference in 2006, an anthropologist and prize specimen of I'm an atheist buttery quoted Golda Meir when asked whether she believed in God. "I believe in the Jewish people, and the Jewish people believe in God." Our anthropologist substituted his own version. "I believe in people, and people believe in God." I prefer to say that I believe in people, and people, when given the right encouragement to think for themselves about all the information now available, very often turn out not to believe in God, and to lead fulfilled and satisfied, indeed liberated, lives.